Hi, welcome back to the next of our presentations on communication and homeostasis. We're moving on to 5.1.1c, the principles of homeostasis. We did briefly talk about receptors and effectors last time, and we'll also focus on the different types of feedback. So, good opportunity to focus on the definition of homeostasis. You should have learnt this at GCSE. What is homeostasis? So, homeostasis, the maintenance of an organism's internal environment within set limits. Many of you might have learnt it as maintaining a constant internal environment. And what kind of things might we be thinking about when we are thinking about what is being maintained? How about body temperature, blood glucose, water, pH, and other ions? All of those are things which are controlled by homeostasis. When you're talking about ions, remember that it must be important to think about potassium ions, sodium ions. Don't just say potassium and sodium. You must specify the word ion within your description of whichever ion you are talking about. Whilst it says the limits may be quite broad, they may also be quite narrow. The acceptable range of temperatures, the optimum range is very narrow in comparison to other ranges. And how are they being controlled? Well, they're being controlled either by endocrine and nervous systems, and we'll talk briefly about both those systems within this presentation, as well as modification of behavior. We thought last time about moving out of the sun, for instance, if it's hot. And if you're more likely to survive if you modify the internal environment and respond to the external changes. So let's just recap on receptors and effectors. Last time we said that receptors are your detectors, the things that detect the external change in your environment. So when you think of your five senses, these are where your receptors are. So ears, eyes, nose, mouth, skin, all of those are things which are detecting things. Effectors bring about the effect. So in other words, these are the things that actually do the changes. So muscles move your way, glands produce a secretion. Those are the responses that are being produced. So receptors detect, effectors produce the effect, all coordinated by the CNS, the central nervous system. Why is homeostasis so important? Well, this is about making sure that we don't cause damage. So cell size, if you increase or change the water potential, then levels of water in the cell may change. I had to change that from amounts of water. You know how I hate the word amount. The cell might dry out, it might swell up and burst, unless you keep the levels of water constant. Enzyme activity, you're all familiar again with the idea of optimum. There's an optimum temperature and an optimum pH. And enzymes work best at their optimum. So if we keep the enzymes at the best possible pH and temperature, then they will work optimally, i.e. at their best. And it allows an organism to be independent from external conditions. If you can maintain a constant internal temperature, then it doesn't matter what the external temperature is, you'll still be able to be active. Obviously, there are limits. If it's really, really freezing cold, then some organisms might not be able to operate and they will rest until the temperature is suitable. Similarly with hot environments. So the endocrine system. The endocrine system is the system that makes our hormones. And hormones are the things that travel around the body from the endocrine glands and go around to somewhere else. So they're produced in one place, and their target organ or their target cells are usually elsewhere in the body, and therefore the hormone needs to circulate in the blood to get to that particular place, to act on it. And then when it reaches the target cell, it binds onto a surface receptor. Remember we thought about cell surface membranes, what's on the surface of those cell surface membranes? We have glycoproteins and glycolipids, which were receptors. These are the receptors we are thinking about, the things that can actually attach and detect a hormone, and then the hormone produces a response. We'll look at the actual response as part of this as we go into 5.1.4. The important thing to think about, though, is that the hormones are slow, long-lasting, and produce widespread responses. So we're not talking about something that happens necessarily instantly, although some hormones can be instant or very quick. Adrenaline, for example, is a hormone that produces a very rapid response, but usually slower and long-lasting. The nervous system, much quicker. We're talking milliseconds for a nervous system response. They detect, relay, and coordinate responses around your body. And again, the neurons, the nerve cells, are the things which transfer the information from one place to another. Remember, there is an electrical impulse that is traveling from one place to another. So receptor detects something, the information gets converted into an electrical impulse. That electrical impulse then travels to your central nervous system, the CNS. The CNS then produces another electrical impulse that travels back along the motor neurons to the effectors so they can produce a response. Lots more are coming up on that in a separate unit too. So just a little outline of what might be the difference between the two. The signal in nervous control is electrical, what we call an action potential, whereas the endocrine signal is a hormone, chemical signal. Speed, the nervous control is milliseconds, endocrine, slow, can be seconds, minutes, hours, months, days, years. It can be much longer lasting. Duration of the signal, again, short lasting versus long lasting. So, when do you think endocrine control will be advantageous over nervous control? So an example might be a longer lasting change being required. So for example, a seasonal change might be a suitable change when we're thinking about an advantageous control of endocrine versus nervous control. If you've got to transition from winter to summer, and therefore you need a different thickness of fur on your skin, for example, that might be controlled by endocrine rather than nervous control. So feedback mechanisms. The idea of negative feedback. This is a really popular exam question. What is negative feedback, and how give an example of how it works? So nearly all of our homeostatic mechanisms that we're thinking about are negative feedback mechanisms. So these are the most common. Positive feedback are pretty rare, and we'll talk about why those are rare in a moment. So negative feedback. Activating what we call a corrective mechanism, doing something to produce a change whenever the internal environment deviates from its normal or acceptable level. So in other words, if something changes from normal, we produce a response to bring it back down or back up to normal, depending on what the change has been. So thermoregulation or temperature regulation. We'll be doing a lot more about this in our next unit. So normal body temperature. If there is an increase in body temperature, there is a corrective mechanism which brings our body temperature back down, but it usually keeps decreasing until you need to do something to bring it back up and bring it back up and so on. So we've got this constant fluctuation up, down, up, down, up, down of temperature. Sometimes I like to use the word parameters. Parameter just means the normal level for the thing that you are changing. So pH is a parameter, temperature is a parameter, glucose concentration is a parameter, and so on. So your normal level might be detected by a receptor. When it's too high, the effector produces the response and then lowers the level and keeps lowering it usually until it falls too low. And again, it's detected by a receptor. And then effector will produce something to raise the level till it increases. So when we're thinking about blood temperature, for example, the blood temperature is detected in a number of places. It's detected in your skin, but it's also detected in your brain. The blood flow of the temperature, the temperature of the blood flow in your brain is detected as it flows past some temperature receptors, and therefore there's multiple places where the temperature is sensed. Positive feedback. Here is a rare example. Something deviates from normal and then further deviates and further deviates. This is to amplify a response. And the best one to know about is thinking about pregnancy, oxytocin. So when the baby's head pushes against the cervix, the hormone oxytocin is produced. This hormone in turn makes the muscles of the uterus contract. That pushes the baby's head against the cervix even more, and then more oxytocin is produced. So this is a cycle which keeps on producing more and more and more until the baby is pushed out, and then no more oxytocin is produced. So that's one example. There is another temperature example when we're thinking about hypothermia, and we'll focus on that one next time. But we'll think about just this as a key example of positive feedback. I don't think this tells us anything particularly. Again, it's just using the word receptor and effector. Good words to be using when you're talking about changes in positive feedback and negative feedback. Try and make sure you're demonstrating your key scientific terminology by putting the words receptor and effector in your answer, because it's listed in the specification point for this. Okay, your chance now to have a go at answering a question. It says on your whiteboards, this should be on a piece of paper. Suggest why effective homeostasis depends on negative feedback systems. So why does homeostasis depend on negative feedback? Pause your video now and write an answer. This is a 6-mark question, so you should be spending about 6 minutes to answer your question. Make sure you paused. Okay, and now here's your answer. This as a model answer, it's not a mark scheme per se, because this isn't an external exam question. Here are possible ways of getting some of the marks. So what is a negative feedback system? A change takes place and then acts to return the situation to normal. They inhibit the change that is occurring. In positive feedback, when a change takes place, the system may act to reinforce the change. So in other words, they're amplifying and keeping on amplifying. In homeostasis, the body seeks to maintain dynamic equilibrium. In other words, you're trying to keep a level at a constant level, at a balance. I shouldn't be putting my hand in front of my face like that. Dynamic equilibrium. In other words, the levels go up, down, up, down. So they're always staying around that certain level. They just fluctuate slightly above and below, above and below, above and below. If there's a change, then they inhibit it and return it back to, or it's near to, the original state. And they say, normally this is possible with negative feedback, but not possible with positive feedback. So positive feedback are much rarer in nature than negative feedback. Okay, that's it for this time. Next time we'll be thinking about thermoregulation, ectotherms and endotherms.